thank you all for coming here to what? To Humanities Decanted, which is the IHC's informal showcase in which faculty present and discuss their newest research and creative work. I'm Susan Derwin, I direct the IHC, and I'm really delighted to see you all here today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Chumash people, who are the traditional custodians of the land upon which the Interdisciplinary Humanities Center is located, and I would like to pay respect to elders both past and present. And I am so happy to welcome distinguished Professor of English Yunte Huang to speak in our Humanities Decanted series. He is the author of numerous award-winning books, including most recently, Chinese Whispers Towards a Trans-Pacific Poetics. Another book, Charlie Chan, The Untold Story of the Honorable Detective and His Rendezvous with American History, was the finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, and he's here to speak to us today about his newest work, Daughter of the Dragon, May Wong's Rendezvous with American History. Did I do something wrong? Did I confuse a subtitle? No. You used rendezvous. Rendezvous. Yeah, rendezvous is everywhere, rendezvousing around the rendezvouser. All right. Well, now this book was published by Liverwrite and was named one of Atlantic's books to get lost in this summer and was among the best books of August 2023, according to the New York Times Book Review, the Christian Science Monitor, and other media outlets. And Yunte is going to be in conversation with Constance Penley, Professor of Film and Media Studies and an affiliate of Feminist Studies. Professor Penley is founding editor of Camera Obscura and author of The Future of an Illusion, Film, Feminism, and Psychoanalysis, as well as NASA Trek, Popular Science, and Sex in America. So after a short presentation by Professor Wong, he and Professor Penley will speak to each other for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to open up the discussion to you, our audience members, so that you can ask questions and share your thoughts. And it's very important that you feel free to continue to enjoy the refreshments during the event. This is a sort of graze as you listen event, so don't be shy about walking up to the table, refilling your glass, taking another olive, etc. So we are another glass, that's right. And we are going to start now with Yunte's presentation. Enjoy.
Yes, okay. Well, thank you, Susan, and thank you for the great staff members at IHC. And thank you all, really, dear colleagues and friends and students. I'm really honored to be here for this occasion, actually. I remember I came here exactly 20 years ago. Man, time flies, really. And we're working on this, series, trilogy for about 15 years. And I remember first time I stood here looking at the Pacific Ocean, like, wow, what a great place to present and have guests and, lecturers and guests and everything. So anyway, I'm going to be brief. Hopefully I can, have more time to have a conversation with Connie. And hopefully I can handle 30 minutes of intellectual engagement with my esteemed colleague. So I'm just going to give, briefly run through some of the things. So this is a trilogy which begins with Charlie Chan about 15 years ago, when I sort of stumbled upon this topic for various reasons. And so that's the first one. And at the time, Charlie Chan apparently, as for those who don't know, is a controversial cultural icon. And but behind the icon was a real Honolulu detective, Cantonese, Chiang Apana. So what I did in this book was really to tell the kind of sort of like a Chinese box, you pull out one box, one layer, there's another one, and then there's another one. So behind the icon, film icon, there's the real detective. But of course, it's also the novelist, Earl Biggers, who was a Harvard graduate, coming from small-town Ohio. And there's a very great kind of Oriental imagination. So that's what I did, kind of resurrected this postmodern icon from its graveyard, sort of kind of dismissed, because for a long time, of course, a lot of Asian Americans found it to be kind of problematic to even reassess this kind of, so he was buried to some extent. And I resurrected him to tell this story, basically to show how the American culture was made through layers of racism, but also very importantly, racial imagination. And in that book, I found it, in a way, I kind of repeating this theme. In a minute, I'm going to talk about the next book. So with Charlie Chan, my basic argument was that, out of this kind of toxic soil of American culture, there came this kind of artistic flower, which is this funny Chinese detective. And so moving on, then, it's the inseparable. It's the story of Chang and Anne Bunker, the so-called Siamese twins. They were actually Chinese descent, but born in Siam, today Thailand. And the amazing story, of course, they were basically sold by their mother to these two Americans who brought them to the United States and exhibited them, displayed them as freaks. And of course, when we do so-called, narratives about minority communities, of course, we often recognize that they are the victims of racism policies and cultural practices and all that, laws. But we often forget that actually how tenacious these minority communities are, how resilient. So, and Siamese twins are definitely fits that kind of counter narrative, is that within a few years of being enslaved to these two American masters, they broke free in my hometown, Buffalo, New York, where I went to graduate school. Declared a kind of independence. And then for another decade or so, they became their own masters, controlling their own destiny, and hired the same manager who used to work for these two American masters, and now the manager is working for them. So for a decade, they continued to exhibit themselves, and they knew exactly what they're doing. They're willingly kind of participating in this kind of racial freak show, but they got paid. Right? And so they made a lot of money out of this decade-long being on the road, hitting every nook and cranny of small town, all over, and made a lot of money for themselves. Eventually, when they made enough, have their 401k issue resolved, they retired very comfortably to a small town in North Carolina because they want to stay as far, away from the prying eye of the public as possible. So a small town under the, Blue Ridge Mountain. And then, of course, the story took a kind of impossible turn, is that they are conjoined. So they ended up marrying two white sisters in town and having 21 children. But of course, the other turn is that they became slave owners. They were slaves previously, and now they, the minute when the table turned, they became slave owners themselves. And during the Civil War, they actually stood solidly on the side of the Confederacy, and they lost most of their investment, their slaves. They also foolishly, poured money into the fire sale of Confederate bonds. But of course, after the defeat of the South, those bonds are basically useless, became souvenirs. And so that's the story. And now the beautiful actress, Chinese actress, May Wong. So in this trilogy, which took me 15 years, as you see, I'm choosing kind of this so-called controversial icons, cultural icons, icon in the sense of being famous, but also icon in the sense of representative. And depending how you count the Siamese twins, so I've chosen 3 or 4 kind of cultural icons to to tell the Asian American story in this kind of long journey of from the early 19th century to the present, to the moment when Michelle Yeoh won Oscar. I marked that, that the long journey from the arrival of the Siamese twins in 1829, actually. They arrived in Boston, and how, they were phenomenal kind of exhibitions. They went to England, all over the world, basically. The same with May Wong. So her story, for those who are not familiar, it's rather simple, that she was born the daughter of a Chinese laundryman in Los Angeles around the turn of the 20th century. And she became apparently, quite addicted to this new thing called motion picture, right? And dreamed about becoming a star, and she made it. Got a foothold, a toehold, and a foothold, and eventually, it made it. But of course, 1920s Hollywood or the film industry was definitely not a great place for somebody like her, who was Chinese. And when yellowface, a Caucasian actress doing ethnic or blackface, yellowface, redface, etc., was really the standard practice for the industry. And so she took off for Europe, and she spent 2 years becoming a much bigger star. And later on, the conversation we're going to have with Connie will partially kind of address some of these issues, her maneuvers, trajectories. How does somebody like her kind of manage to either break through or being challenged? What do you do in that kind of toxic environment where you're so talented and beautiful, shining, and then the cards are really stacked against you? So just to briefly kind of run down her story, coming back from Europe, she was recognized as a global star, and that was a good period for her in the 1930s. And of course, once again, World War II broke out, and then she had a lot of, disappointments when it comes to big, budget films, and she failed to get the lead role once again because of racism. And then she took off for China, did a kind of soul-searching trip, looking for her so-called Chinese soul. And she spent 9 months traveling in China and returned. And but she never actually managed to get her career back, in a sense. And eventually, she died of alcoholism at a very young age of 56. So she was a star in about 60 films from the silent era to the talkies, all the way to the time of her death. And so, and it's, of course, she had now having I would say, a big comeback in the sense of books about her, hopefully films about her as well, and a lot of kind of mini-series and Netflix and Hollywood is really very good at rewriting its own history, right? And in one of the mini-series, I think it's called Hollywood, actually she was able to get Oscar for the supporting actress role. Of course, it's not true, but Hollywood was very good at rewriting that, kind of, resetting the record. And so that's the kind of things I'm interested in. But overall, her story, I think, is about that if America, falls in love with May Wong or fell in love with May Wong because of her looks and her talent, then actually their romance, became problematic or taboo, also because of her looks. That's really the paradox I'm trying to unpack, and that's really the gist of her story. So, with that, I think I'm ready for our show.
So glad to be here and to see all of you. This is a daunting prospect to try to cover in half an hour the gist and import of Yunte's latest book in his trilogy Rendezvous with American History series. It's also daunting and exciting that Yunte has in fact written a quartet of Asian American biographies if we include that of his own peripatetic life story, as it exquisitely and often humorously is woven into the histories of these iconic Asian Americans. Like those he writes about, Yunte too has his own brilliant subversiveness and brilliance in the face of being a China man in America and negotiating the racism, anti-Asian violence and bigotry, both cultural and written into our very laws and policies from the Chinese Exclusion Act to the Motion Picture Hays Code, and much more. So Yunte has already mentioned that there is real surge right now of female Asian American representation on screen and in popular culture. When he mentioned, Michelle Yeoh winning the Academy Award, like the first Asian American female to win the Academy Award for Best Acting, and of course, Lucy Liu, Awkwafina, just many more. But of course, the apotheosis of female Asian American representation can be seen in Mattel's release for the 2023 AAPI month of, you guessed it, the May Wong Barbie in its Inspiring Women series. And of course, the U.S. Mint's release in its American Women Quarter series of the May Wong Quarter. Okay, so this is maybe the absolute best time for us to be through Yunte's work in Daughter of the Dragon to go back and look at how we got there, how we got to this, seeming like acceptance and celebration, of Asian American female representation. So I wanted to look at asking Yunte about some of the early obstacles that May Wong encountered from her seemingly improbable journey from Launder's daughter in L.A. To the international star that she became. And of course, as a film and media scholar, I'm of course fascinated and impressed by Yunte's authoritative and deeply personal account of the journey that took May Wong through all the major moments, in that history as she navigated over a 40-year period the move from silent to sound, being in one of the first Technicolor films, going from film to television, working in vaudeville and theater, and all her pioneering influences on fashion, cooking, and Hollywood activism. But I need to make things much more specific here. And so what I wanted to focus on is the main argument through, look at those obstacles, but through one of the main arguments running throughout this book about how May Wong navigated between the stereotypes of the self-sacrificing Madame Butterfly and the devious dragon lady and the forces of racism, sexism, and ageism that Yunte says was akin to foot binding in the strictures on her agency. Okay, so what did she do to be more than the star coolie of Hollywood? Now, Yunte argues throughout the book for Wong's subversive agency, as he did for Charlie Chan, and the Siamese twins of his earlier books, improbable agency, that he has, as he says, resurrected. I love it that you always end your books with at the gravestone, of whoever is the subject of the book. Okay, now, he shows in great detail, how in her role, for example, as the cruel and vengeful daughter of the evil Fu Manchu in her second film, 1931's Daughter of the Dragon, as in her other roles, she drew attention to or even exploded the stereotype by overacting those roles, and roles that she had admittedly little agency in choosing. Now, I have to say that in all of the extraordinary praise that Yunte's book has already received, I have found one stubborn point of resistance to his argument. In her review, for example, of Daughter of the Dragon for the New York Times, the Times nonfiction book critic, Jennifer Salathe says, okay, here it is. Unlike Daughter of the Dragon, the film, Daughter of the Dragon, the book, is clearly intended as a form of reclamation and subversion. Wang cites other scholars who have insisted that Wang's portrayal of a character who is, in Wang's blunt words, devoid of humanity, was in fact a sly act of cultural sabotage. Okay, then, and this, otherwise the entire review is just like over the top praise, except for here. May Wong drew attention to or even exploded the stereotypes by overacting these roles. Wong writes, not entirely convincingly. I mean, she just like tried to refute your whole argument, in this one little throwaway here. Okay, and she says, after all, there's little indication that white audiences in the 30s were primed to have such stereotypes exploded. She just, so that very much stood out for me. And I've also recognized that same kind of resistance to even considering Asian American female agency in the book by our colleague Celine Paranas-Shimizu in the hypersexuality of race performing Asian American women on screen and scene. And she does actually this very similar thing in her succeeding book on Asian American men on scene and screen. That was the follow-up. And there Shimizu argues for the worth, the merit of the pleasure she and other Asian American women take in these stereotypes. It's supposed to be a guilty pleasure. She just goes, no, it's like total pleasure. I'm sorry, just total pleasure. And while at the same time arguing for the way performers and filmmakers challenge them through taking on and exploding them. So I know it's a lot of build-up, but I want to discuss that with Yunte and just ask him through some specific examples where he demonstrated, not just through hermeneutic readings of the films, but all of the, the studio politics, the, legal status, the politics in the U.S. around this, how nonetheless, this kind of, subversive work and creative agency took place. So perhaps we could, and also, and you mentioned this too, also in the face of Hollywood's belief that yellow-face actors could do better Chinese than Chinese actors, and so Wong's critical conversation, if you will, about these stereotypes. She's also dealing with the fact that, white actors playing Chinese roles are considered to be more authentic than what she was able to do. So maybe we could start with Daughter of the Dragon and the arguments that you made there for the way she indeed, was exhibiting a great deal of critical and creative agency.
Great. Well, thank you. I have a confession to make. I've done many interviews, and all the lobes of my brain have been picked clean. So right now, I'm kind of clean. But no, I'm sorry. So let's take that, because I encounter actually the same kind of reaction like when it comes to book reviews with the Charlie Chan book, actually. Because there I argue, for instance, in the case of blackface, Step and Fetch It, right? In what ways are he kind of overacting and therefore exploding the stereotype? And so I argue the same way. So not just, let's come back to Daughter of the Dragon, for instance. She was partnering with Dr. Fu Manchu, played by her best friend, actually, Warner Olin, my favorite Charlie Chan actor. So so we can talk about, for instance, Asian American actors, how they engage, with these kind of restrictions when it comes to racial casting. But we should also talk about, I think one thing, I'm so glad to be in the midst of my colleagues, especially film studies scholars, really. I can learn a great deal from you guys. And I did, of course, this argument, thanks to many of the authors that actually you published, edited and all that, including Wang Yiman, right? She did, so this kind of overacting, kind of exploding the stereotype was really kind of, I think, among the academics, it's pretty kind of, widely accepted. And so that's the confession I have to make, that I'm straddling like two, in a way, domains. One is writing for the public and these book reviewers and everything, and the other is writing for my colleagues like you. And so you point to this kind of key issue, which is not just my problem in terms of the book where it's situated, but we're actually talking about the reception of all the consumption, right, of cultural products, especially film, when it comes to films that have, covert, overt racial connotation. In the old days, these are just considered racist, like Charlie Chan films, will be just considered racist. Academics over the past few decades since the civil rights movement, as far as Asian Americans is concerned, the Asian American movement, they have come up with a very powerful critique of these films. And in that context, for instance, May Wong became sort of kind of object of critique from the beginning, and recently more kind of warmer receptions when we become, I would say, in terms of academic thinking, kind of more sophisticated way of engaging with this. But that's not always the case, say, in the public, domain. And when it comes to guilty pleasure, whether or not to what extent there's guilt involved, right? But so like today, I was in a leading an honors section for my big lecture, and we are talking about. I think this is actually related in a sense that, give you an example. So I'm very interested in doggerel, nursery rhymes, and one like American, nursery rhyme, which is always kind of, sings in the back of my head all these years writing these 3 books, was this very popular nursery rhyme, which is Ching Chong Chinaman sitting on the fence, trying to make $1 out of 15 cents, right? And this is a kind of ringing, piping children's voice singing on the street when they were doing rope jumping song. So, of course, kids singing that, jumping rope, I'm pretty sure at the time they have no clue. This is how brutal, and because the whole entire nursery rhyme, Ching Chong Chinaman sitting on the fence, trying to make $1 out of 15 cents. And here along came the choo-choo train and knocked them in the cuckoo brain, and that was the end of the 15 cents. This is like brutal portrayal of basically committing violence against Chinese who built the railroad, and now the train is going to run them down, kill off their dream of becoming rich because they're cunning businessmen. How deeply racist, like openly racist that is, somehow that is consumed on the street by innocent kids singing these songs. But I'm interested in, say, how that rhyme kind of works into this, kid's brain, kind of in terms of cognitive science, without being aware the moral lesson which is embedded in these songs, is how they consume that. So all these years with the Charlie Chan, with Daughter of the Dragon, right, we're talking about kind of the public consumption of these racist stereotypes, images, and all that. And so once again, coming back to your question, so I think we in the, within the ivory tower, let's just say, have done, I think, a very kind of convincing job, brilliant job of coming up with these very powerful critiques. And to what extent we can extend that, change the larger discourse and making people like the book reviewer kind of recognize this is what it is, right? I think it takes a very long process, just like this song, that has worked its way into this, kid's brain, how to undo that kind of racial, subconscious. So I think it takes same kind of, this is the way I find, interesting. So every time I got like a reading like that, I said, here we are again, right? The straddle, the two fields I'm working in, So this is my kind of answer, the first answer, speaking, for myself, where I see this question coming from and where it's situated in terms of discipline. Right?
Yeah, yes, and I'm glad that you mentioned that it takes a very long time, because what the New York Times reviewer says is that this couldn't possibly have really been any kind of effective subversion, because it couldn't even be recognized by audiences at the time who just kind of lived the stereotypes. They weren't looking for stereotypes to be exploded or anything.
In the same way, for instance, this kid singing this song don't recognize this is a racist song.
Yes, but you do talk in the book about how for May Wong to know that she was doing this gave her a great deal of pleasure, and also a sense of just like the integrity of her creativity, and but also it could be shared with others, like Warner Olin on the set with her, knowing that she was doing, and a close circle of people who would know. And so I'm wondering if our criterion for whether subversion works is whether it works right there in the moment, or it's kind of looking to where we are now, if it's just maybe kind of a message in a bottle, We're doing it right now for our own pleasure and the knowledge of a inner few who know exactly what we're doing, because they've had the same experiences themselves and are maybe trying in their own ways to do this. I don't remember Warner Oland, any discussion of Warner Oland, playing with this, but still, of course he was Swedish, so anyway, playing yellow face roles. But anyway, but he too was, I think, aware of this. So anyway, do you see what I'm saying here? Is that, maybe we don't have to say it's successful, a moment of resistance and critique because, people knew right at the time what it was.
Right. No, absolutely. That's why I'm saying it's a slow process, kind of different layers of resistance or, subversion, right? So sometimes it's very subtle. It's like a pun in a sentence, right? Yeah. If you catch it, then fine. If you don't, then fine too. So in a sense, the fact, we really have to kind of consider the historical context, in that 1920s and 30s, she was literally the only kind of genuinely Chinese face on the screen as far as, big names are concerned. And, but not just that. So first of all, in terms of representation, she was really sick and tired of teaching or coaching these Caucasian actresses, how to act Chinese, how to use chopsticks, or how to pretend to talk Chinese. So given the opportunity, it's great that she can, do it in her way, okay? Despite the fact her way was also constrained already. That's, I think, once again, to go back to the in terms of racial ventriloquism, yellowface or blackface, we know that, the art of yellowface or blackface is not just about Caucasian actors doing minor and minority roles. It's also about people like May Wong or Stephen Fetchit doing Asian characters or black characters, having to follow the industrial kind of industry's standard as to what is conceived as Chinese. Or therefore, if she acts in a certain way, the director might say, no, that's not how Barbara Stanwyck behaved or performed, right? So she's up against that kind of standard. Of course, when it comes to, say, Shanghai Express, for instance, another example in which it's Joseph von Sternberg's love film, basically for Marlene Dietrich, and May Wong was playing second fiddle, playing a kind of lowly Chinese prostitute. It's a film supposedly about China, wartime China, and Joseph von Sternberg has his own fantasy about what China should look like. Of course, one day when he actually traveled there, he saw, oops, this is not actually what it looked like. By the time he was making the film, May Wong was kind of, like a tiny protest to say, this train doesn't look like a Chinese train at all. And Sternberg would say, well, in my imagination, this is what the Chinese train should look like. And that's really the overall kind of attitude what Hollywood consider. It's, Hollywood always knows what should be what and who should look like what. And Native Americans should look like this, and African Americans should like this. So these are kind of foot biting I'm talking about, not just, so the question of authenticity is less an issue or concern in that context in terms of subversion. Subversion not in the sense of say, this is more authentic. No, she's up against these rules, and how do you bend those rules slightly? And very kind of sometimes, so we cannot say, oh, this is there, where, that's, as Gertrude Stein would say, there's no there, there is a there or there's a no there. That's why I'm going back, I refer back to the nursery rhyme example, that how slowly kind of it works into the larger kind of cultural domain, and what do you do, to push back against it. So we have to talk about the entire kind of concrete kind of historical context down to in a studio setting, the larger culture as well. And this is really kind of different layers of story I was trying to tell.
And this is like another convolution here, but I'm interested in, Yunte Huang talks about this in her work on May Wong, and you have talked about it too, but the idea of yellow face, which, as I understand it, is performers like May Wong, when she is doing this overacting or this criticism, for her a criticism, a subversion of the expectations for Chinese actors here. That in fact that overacting is kind of she's like referencing the yellow face actors, so she's kind of, her overacting is incorporating the overacting, and bad yellow face acting, of these white performers who are trying to do it.
Right. Yeah, sure. I mean, well, so there's one technical difficulty. I mean, I definitely quote her and borrow that argument. In a way, I am making the same argument. But there is certain kind of, it's like if you screen a film today, if you, like my favorite Charlie Chan film, Black Camel, made in 1931. And the same year, Daughter of the Dragon was made. When I screened that film, students they found it to be funny in a sense. It's like I played, Ezra Pound reading poetry or T.S. Eliot. They all laugh, like, who reads poetry like that? And, there's the distance, historical distance. As you know, stage acting was considered serious art, right? Whereas film, from the get-go, was like, low formal art, really popular. So we have to understand, a lot of the actors, especially directors, like Black Camel is so theatrical, the same way I think Daughter of the Dragon, in the same kind of overacting, has something to do with the fact that stage acting was still part of film's kind of technology, kind of the aesthetics, that you need to act like as if you're on stage. And today, of course, you know, and natural acting, a natural scene, setting, I think there's a change of taste. And so for us to make that argument, we kind of had to understand a little bit. Actually, for the audience of those years, that's actually not overacting, right? So I think we need some distance to understand. I think it's difficult, actually. I recognize to show, these films to my students. They say, "This is just so boring." Like why they like one bullish boom and then it's dead. But of course, on stage, it's that's how they act. And May Wong, who actually had great ambitions to be on real theater, and that's of course the dream of most of the actors, artists those years, is to be actually on stage, real live stage. One thing she actually liked about it is that you don't subject yourself to the lighting especially, or the camera, the post production, the manipulation, everything, because you're faced with live audience, just like we now. And
that was I was really impressed and moved by that. Her love for theater acting, where she could have a connection to the audience, that wasn't mediated.
Right,
by
that's feedback right away.
Feedback right, it wasn't mediated by everything. Yes. Are we at the time where we? Okay. Oh, good. Okay. So, are there? That was a great caveat there, that we should remember the codes of acting in film at the time being very informed by codes of theater, and so it might look like overacting. And so we should take that into consideration. But that's what I really love about your analysis. You always, in any, this is it's such a cultural history. When we think about biography, we just think about all the threads that are running through here. Like, just for example, your analysis, your claim that this exploding of the stereotypes is going on is not just informed by your reading of what you think May Wong was doing here, but your deep knowledge of the codes of filming, of the racism, of the legal status, the political status of everything at the time. So, but especially your reading of Hollywood, and its constraints and strictures on this. Are there some other examples that stand out to you of times where you thought that you make the claim that May Wong is doing this kind of subversion?
So
expectations.
You heard this story before. So I spent, thanks to COVID, that I was able to go through, because of COVID, I wrote the book during COVID, and archival research was out of the question in the sense of going actually to archives. Yale Beinecke libraries where May Wong's about 200 letters, personal correspondence to Carl Van Vechten, another kind of mover and shaker when it comes to racial, kind of cross-racial imagination, photography and everything, right? Carl Van Vechten. So during her lifetime, she became good friends with Carl Van Vechten, who was an author, but also photographer, who took a lot of pictures of mostly kind of colored bodies, right? Especially like African-American men, through like a gay kind of lens and like nude scenes. That actually these photos were embargoed for about 25 years. It eventually came out, and only recently we realized, and he was of course a big, patron for a lot of Harlem Renaissance artists like such as Orionelle Hurston. And May Wong was actually his first object, because he became amateur photographer. and May Wong was actually his first kind of object, to take pictures of. So she wrote, they became best friends, and she wrote about 200 letters to Carl van Vechten, and also became good friends with his wife, Carl van Vechten's wife, Fanny. And so just give you an example, like to show that May Wong actually knew what she was doing. And they were making Daughter of Shanghai, the other daughter. And May Wong wrote to Carl van Vechten and his wife, said, and this is, by the way, this is like a really big moment for May Wong, because this is a film by the studio called The May Wong Story, because she's the lead, partnering with Philip Ang, this gay Korean American actor. So it should be a big, this is no longer yellow face, and these two Asian stars, are pairing up, and to do this is 1938, to do a film about China war with Japan and everything. So it should be, I would say, it's a good thing for her. But in the letter, she wrote, like, this film is like pure hokum, meaning bullshit, like pure hokum. But she took Hollywood hokum very seriously. She worked very hard, sacrificed her nails, kind of like long curated, nails and everything. That shows you she knew what she was doing, certainly. As to how exactly she can push back against, the Hollywood standards and everything. Once again, that's for us to tease out and to situate, the performance in the exact context, to tell the whole story. So she definitely knew what she was doing.
And also, you write about how there are other ways in which she showed her agency in relation to resisting these stereotypical roles, while completely embodying and embracing them too, because, as she said, those are the roles that were available to me, but also, that was her livelihood. Okay, that was her livelihood. But she also resisted, you write about how she, first of all, left for Europe when she got sick of the roles that she was given, but also how she even walked away from a role once because she just could not stomach what it was that she was going to be asked to do.
Right, sure. This is the Good Earth, certainly, and the, China film those years, and a big budget MGM optioned the novel by Pearl S. Buck, and there was a big budget, investment. They carved, a California hillside and turned it into Chinese rice paddy. It took them 4 years, and how big that investment was. And she would have been, great for the starring role, the female, the farmer Wang's wife. Of course, the role went to.
Everybody knows Pearl S. Buck and this film. It was the height of Chinaphilia.
Of course.
It was like such a huge phenomenon.
And also coming out of Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, it's perfect moment for that film. From studio's perspective, who among the audience will not sympathize with a Chinese farmer, talking about famine in faraway China when the country just coming out of Great Depression and Dust Bowl, totally relatable. So it's perfect for her, of course, but the role went to Luis Reina, who, by the way, is great, of course, won Oscar for that role. But once again, when we talk about acting or overacting, what is the standard, what is the aesthetic standard, we really need to, travel back to see what kind of reception the Hollywood expect from the audience and everything. So,
but Louis, in this once again, European actors coming to America and being able to find their way, make their careers through playing, yellow face, red face, black face,
Yeah, that's really the game in Hollywood. Is that
so she was not given the role, the role that
right. So May Wong was not given the role, but she then was tested, auditioned for the minor role, kind of Lotus, another role, and she really fed up with it. She actually went through 2 auditions, and eventually she gave up, and she realized this is pointless, because when more and more actors were cast for the film, she realized if she were to play that role, she'll be surrounded by basically, you know, a whole platoon of Caucasian actors doing, Caucasian actors doing Asian roles. She'll be surrounded by this. And so that's when she decided, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. So she walked away. And that's, of course, and that's how when she went to China. And the sad story, of course, her little sister, Mary, actually did get a minor part playing a young bride. And that experience was so traumatizing for Mary. And she eventually, had a tragic end, as you know. So this is one.
The only way Asians appeared in that film were as extras.
Right, as ambience.
And very minor roles.
Right, as
background
ambience.
roles.
And that, that really was kind of traumatizing experience for the Asian American community, not just for her. So for her to walk away from that, but occasionally she will totally embrace these roles and all that. I mean, I'm a bigger fan of her, not just because of she's a big star, but it's that kind of, I guess, in terms of, what is the, for a while it was quite a hot, trendy, is Gramsci notion about, strategy versus tactics, right? When it comes to how do you push back against hegemony. Yeah. No, Gramsci, actually, when there's a strategy. Gramsci, too. And so just to give you an example, the way how I, to what extent I appreciate the all kind of a whole kind of rhetorical strategies she's using, embodying, or trailblazing. Just give you an example. So when you're put in that situation, so before this book came out, right, was in early August, July. So my publicist, my publisher told me that, New York Times is going to do an interview, with me for this book. And they're going to fly somebody from New York to LA. So I basically will meet her, mid-ground, go to LA. And they allow me to ask me, like, where do you want to have the interview done? And so I came up with a list. So I chose Formosa. Formosa Cafe is actually in the heart of Hollywood. It's a very old restaurant, founded in 1929, and it's still there. It's like, everybody should go there, actually. I can't vouch for the food, but the decor it's fantastic if you are into. And they also have there's a gallery of Asian American actors. Everyone, single one of them were there, including Enemy One. And they also have like a rickshaw in the backyard as well. And so I said, like, how about doing it over there, right? And so Casey Schwartz, who's an author herself, and so she came. So we made a date in early August, and so we had lunch there. Eventually, I will, drive Casey around to see her grave, cemetery, and her last addresses, the houses, and everything. But something happened at the restaurant, So we're sat in a corner. This is like Bugsy, Bugsy Siegel's corner. Bugsy, the mobster, who squeezed millions of dollars out of Hollywood. This is his, place. He actually has a safe, like where he will dump cash. The safe is still there, actually. So and it was not very crowded that day. So we had a Bugsy, Siegel corner, just like the two of us, and we were chatting and having. I even forgot what I ordered because the food was not really a concern. But at one point, I had to get up, go to the men's room toward the end of the interview. And so on my way back, we were sitting near the entrance, the Bugsy Siegel corner. And the bathroom is like middle of the restaurant. So when I was coming out, walking towards going back to my seat, a white woman came in, looking like a Hollywood executive, just coming out of a meeting. And I was, for the occasion, I was not really so formal. I think I had like a shirt, looking like a businessman, sort of. And this woman coming towards me, and she held up one index finger and said, "Table for one, please." I continued to walk. I knew exactly what was happening. And I continued to smile, my Charlie Chan smile. And then she asked again. She said she got a little bit. "Table for one, please." And I didn't say anything, continued to walk, smile. And then she realized a mistake. She said, "You don't really work here, do you?" And I said, "I could have." So anyway, so I went back to my table. I sat down. I asked Casey, like, you know what happened? She's like, "What happened?" I said, so I told her the story. And she said, "Yeah, I saw her coming in." Really? So anyway, that's kind of, I'm not saying I live for that kind of moment, but all these years writing about Charlie Chan, about racism and counter-racism, subversive strategies, what do you do when you're in that situation? And speaking as a writer, that's like the crowning moment if somebody, New York Times sent in a journalist flying all the way to interview me for the book, and now I'm being recognized or misrecognized as a restaurant manager. Oh, by the way, I did, have that role. I have ran a restaurant in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. So I fit in perfectly well, maybe because of that. Maybe she saw that. So, I mean, I of course, I have the sense of humor for that occasion. I could say, yeah, I could have. It's true, I could have. And, but these different layers, I think, the minor strategy, what do you do? And when we say, of course, I mean, I think a different person will say, like, "Fuck you," like, how can you say that? This is so racist and everything. But of course, this of course is racist, but also understand, it took her many years living in America. When a situation like that, you kind of have to understand where it came from, I guess. So in that sense, I'm interested in her story because of the different layers in it. It will take so long to unpack, and so many. So it's not you say cultural history. I'm not very interested. It's an odd thing to say. I'm not so interested in biography, really. Yeah. Really, I'm more interested in what that person did, in that context. So it's that the context that I'm deeply kind of interested in.
But that's what makes your biography so great. I mean, they are cultural histories. I mean, I was thinking when I was reading the May Wong book, and then going back and reading the Charlie Chan book, but especially this one. This could have been in the Imagining California series, because what you have in this book, I mean, you've got an important perspective on Hollywood history, but also Los Angeles history, California history. I mean,
World War II, of course. I mean, the attack on the Elwood, Japanese submarine attack as well.
I know, and that was actually something I was going to end with. Like, how do you work Santa Barbara into all your books? I mean, somehow everybody makes a tour through Santa Barbara. Although I think that there was one misrecognition where it talks about Charlie Chaplin's flying a studio, and that wasn't actually Charlie Chaplin's studio. But anyway, it's like that was part of so there's just such a Hollywood lore about Santa Barbara, and I got a kick out of your always showing how somehow they always end up in Santa Barbara, but oh yeah, let's see. Okay, on that I was able to get that in. But anyway, just to finish that, it's like just like the histories, the cultural histories that go through, just make this so much more than what we often think of as a biography of a single figure.
First off, congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
A very simple question. How did the Chinese communities in Europe and the U.S. respond to May Wong? What was their impression of her?
You mean at that time? At that time? Well, there was really very little kind of so-called Chinese community to speak of in terms of reaction. Like in Berlin, it was a very small, a few hundred people. UK, slightly bigger, but mostly as a set, for incorporated into the scenes, actually, most of the time. But for Chinese in mainland, for instance, well, first of all, from the get-go, Chinese media were very interested in her. You have a real Chinese, star in Hollywood. So everything she appeared in will be reported, her hobby, and of course, again, gossip column will also fabricate many things. Anyway, she's very popular in China. But on the other hand, as you know, Chinese sort of conservative culture as well. Being an actor is not really an ideal job for a woman in those years, especially since she will act such as in Thief of Baghdad, very, very little clothing, showing a lot of flesh. And that was kind of controversial for a lot of film reviewers in China. So eventually she went to China in 1936. The reception was really kind of divided. On the one hand, she was welcome as a big star, and some film critics were still very nasty and critical of her for those roles, like Daughter of the Dragon, perpetuating, the stereotype of Dragon Lady, Dr. Fu Manchu's daughter, for instance. So it's mixed reaction.
Hi. So I have a question. So at the very end of it, you mentioned that you're interested more in the cultural context of the history, not instead of the biography of the person you're writing about. And when I was listening to talk about this, several things that keep coming to my mind is that I just saw like how the history progress in terms of representation, blackface, yellowface. I wrote down a few notes like Swing Time, Fred Astaire doing the blackface, and you have John Ford later on doing the Searchers, which is reflecting on the Hollywood's own idea of the Indians, the Native Americans, and then fast forward to like as recent as Chloe Zhao, the first not non-white American but actually just Chinese women, the first Chinese women to win Oscar Best Director. Like, then you also have like Dave Chappelle, the comedian. I remember he talked about how he had once left $30 million on the table because he looked at his own sketch at the time for Comedy Central, I believe, was racist, and he was also doing the overplaying of the racist role. But then he mentioned the incident that he saw a white colleague laugh, and that made him feel the wrong way, and he kind of went to himself to to reflect on what exactly he's doing. And I'm trying to say that I saw all the context of this different period of the overacting, whether it's a subversion or to as recent as right now that Chloe Zhao and Dave Chappelle, they're going against it. They're more speaking, frankly about that's racist. And so I wonder what's your take on where the direction would go,
Right. Well, having been recognized as a restaurateur at that particular moment actually taught me something in terms of progress. How far we traveled or how far, how much further we had to go. I'm somewhat skeptical in the sense of when it comes to, art. What is art? Art is imitation, the conflation of, one thing that always bugs me about, for instance, about like NPR interviewing a novelist, they always talk about the story, the narrative, the character. The next moment they talk about what happened in Israel, and as if there's no, like, this is a novel, and the other is reality. The reason I'm saying that is that, and that's the reason I'm interested in cultural history, not the biography, because when it comes to a person's story, it's pretty straightforward progress, right? But when you step back, there's the cultural context. And a writer's job is really to create the structure, for that story to unfold. And the reason I've kind of have beef again, with like NPR style interviewing novelists talking about characters as if they don't talk about the form of writing, like the choice of vernacular, the language, the form itself, something we often discuss in film studies and in literature. If you can talk about a novel the same way you talk about what happened in Israel, as a literature professor, as a writer, I have some problem with that actually. And I have my TA here, Mary. I'm teaching 20th century American literature, and I try my best not to discuss poetry in the same way you discuss novels. You can go in, what does this mean? Because what does this mean? A lot of times, it really depends on what you mean by it. How do you approach that? So to tell her story, I need to go. I become very self-aware in terms of where I come from and how do I tell this story. How do I pull Santa Barbara into this story narrative? So I spend a lot of time, not in the stories themselves, but really to go around to provide that structure. And of course, I learned that from Melville. Digression is to write about the anatomy of whale, which has almost nothing to do with the hunting whale, but of course have everything to do with the knowledge of whale and everything. So what I'm trying to say is that if you step back when you think about this, when it comes to say whether a film directed by a real, let's say, Chinese American director, is that actually more authentic than say a film directed by a Caucasian director? I really don't know. I don't think we can take for granted because of this the standard, the audience anticipation, the way to consume these films cannot be changed simply by say one Chinese director who will try to do something different. Yes, it takes a long time. Yes, we can celebrate this moment. On the other hand, we also have to be very careful because everything has history, and how we get here, has precedence and all of that.
And I believe there was.
Yeah, Larry.
Here?
Yes. Yeah, if you have a quick follow up, that's fine.
Sorry. I was gonna say it's interesting that because I know a little about Chloe Zhao, and we have a very similar background, me and Chloe, and the thing about her films, everything she had done, and I went to her talk. She talked about how she's interested in the West, like the West of America, the Native Americans and the Indians, and as a Chinese woman who grew up in Beijing, and I don't want to talk about her too much. Like, it's just weird. And the reason she gave, I remember she answered a question that she thought historically when people are lost, they always go west, and she thought that's what she would do. So far, she has never made a movie about has any protagonist or Asian representation in her films. Her films are outsiders looking into American society, van lifers and whatnot, and just saw that's interesting. Like, the only true representation of Asians in recent memory would be this year's Everything Everywhere All at Once. I was hoping if you can elaborate a little bit on that, or the outsider perspective, because you yourself as an outsider.
Well, yeah, sure. I am sort of like an outsider writing about what's going on in America because I didn't grow up in this country, and I definitely still kind of in the learning process. And I'm writing about the Wild Wild West, which is California. Well, the entire American, the nation. In Tuscaloosa, Alabama, that's real Wild Wild West. If you want to, Connie came from Florida, so she knows, across the state line what's happening over there. Yeah, Larry.
I had a laugh when you said, you're not interested in biography. I say the same thing. I read a lot of books, but then I look back, and I've read a lot of biographies, but they were all in context to a bigger picture of history, and you really did that. The unique thing, I think, with May Wong, we get to see her on the film, on the screen, and hearing her voice, hearing the background. It became very personal. Reading it's like oh, I think I know her now. But my comment is that, of course, she can receive criticism. She took these roles. I think I would take on face value her comment. She didn't have choice. She wanted to be in film. And if we think about it, zooming back, I mean, she's been gone over 60 years. And I think we can take a bigger view back. It's almost like Darwin's the floor of nature cracking and a new species comes up, and it makes a new niche. And this is what happens so often, even in economics. You have the invention of the chip, and then you have the mainframe, which led to modems and the internet. None of that was predictable. But here's May Wong out there, like you said so eloquently, by herself, not being able to predict, where is this going? I have no plan. I want to get some movies. But without her, maybe the people, the Asian actors and actresses after her would have not come until much later. So you think about her in a complex system, she played a very important role, whether she knew it or not, she probably didn't. And she didn't live long enough to see it. It would have been wonderful that she would have seen the 60s and 70s. Just a comment on that
absolutely.
context.
Well, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So in that way, that's why like people like Lucy Liu, Sandra Oh, they're really kind of grateful. Especially Lucy Liu was deeply
As well they should
grateful.
be.
Yeah, absolutely. For anyone being the trailblazer for the future generation of Asian American artists. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Yes, Susan. Use your mic. Yes.
Thank you. So I'm interested in your experience of writing this text and whether, well, two things. First, were you ever surprised by what you were discovering as you wrote? Number one. And number two, in reading the reviews of the time, were there any indications or any kind of registrations even of any kind of dissonance or between the role and the actor, or that sort of the hyperbole that you were talking about, sort of the calling attention to the appropriation of was there any, did you sense anywhere, and I don't mean literally, any disjunctions? And sort of, and in you, it's a similar. Was there any moment of subversion in yourself when you were writing this, as you discovered whatever it was you were writing?
Right. So, just like book reviews today, film reviews those years have its kind of industrial standard, right? There's a vocabulary. There's the way you write turning a paper. Students are supposed to do this and that. So it's very difficult to break out of that box. And most of the reviews, speaking of reviews, especially the obits, for me, the most shocking thing was actually when she passed away. Of course, the obituaries all over the world, Time Magazine, New York Times, everything. She's everywhere. But how outrageously, as if racism suddenly came back, because she disappeared, became obscure, her career went into decline, and all those racial tropes were resurrected. It kind of intensified. And that was actually shocking to me, in that the moment, when she should be celebrated, now finally, she should be recognized as a great artist. Nope, that's not what happened. So I still recognize, pigeonholed as this. If you read New York Times, I quote some of this.
You got
the adjectives.
Real dig in at the New York Times.
Right. Yeah. So the fact that New York Times now want to interview me for this book, actually, I have a respect for them, because if the editorial editors have read the book very carefully, the sections I quote from New York Times, I said New York Times really led the pack again in terms of portraying her in such a kind of racist and gender bias and sexist way. Of course, I think we have traveled a long distance, especially for New York Times in that way. Right? Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you.